So welcome to the workshop, everybody. We've titled it Body Autonomy because we're going to be talking about how women can take our bodies back. We can take ownership and we can develop a sense of confidence within ourselves in the case that we do perhaps get pregnant, and who knows what the state of the world is. We don't have to be so dependent on the government and rules, regulations, authority, and law. So with me today is the amazing Allison Dey, who I've known for, drumroll please, going on 20 years. Because as we realized a few days ago when we caught up, it's been a while since we've actually lived together in our Buddhist community in the campground, which is for another video, but it is a wild one. And Allison was what would we call you, Allison?
They called me Camp Mom, but I was the
Yeah,
campground host.
you were the campground host. I really saw you as the mom because you're so kind of wild, but you were like the wild woman, like you were the wild woman of Diamond Mountain, meaning you understand the value of food and nutrition and like foraging and like taking care. Like you really took care of us because you understood how to get resources, and you are a mom. But yeah, so I can see how mom came through with that. But you and I would have like these awesome conversations and we'd just be laughing and howling, and you know especially in a place that could get a little serious. um I didn't know that spirituality could be so serious until I moved to this place. And yeah, I got pretty serious for a while, but that was good for me. So bouncing back now into the mudya, to the middle, Alice and I, well, I was the person always behind the camera. So people knew me as to be like the tech person, which I think is funny. Um, but I am, I can certainly work my way around it because I have a business, or had a business, in video and television production. So Allison, after the Roe versus Wade experience, I'm not going to call it a turnover yet because I'm not educated enough in it to make a statement, but that seems to be the common conception, which we'll talk about on Roe v. Wade. But she reached out to me to ask if we could do this conversation, and I was all about it because, Allison and I meet very, very clearly in the middle, where we believe in autonomy, and that we are not victims, and that we are creating our realities, and that we just need sometimes some information, some support, and some love. And so Allison, who is a wild woman and a medicine woman and an herbologist and a school teacher, and so many things. Allison, I'm going to let you actually tell us a little bit about yourself, like how you got into being a wild woman, your journey, so to speak.
Well, I think you have to start out a little odd to start with. So I was probably never mainstream from day one, um, which was a little weird because I grew up in the Midwest, and the Midwest is fairly mainstream. We think of that as being, middle America, whatever. And it was a great place to grow up because it was still the 60s, and, things were pretty innocent. And it was a lovely place to grow up. However, when I was 17, I couldn't wait to leave. So, because like, I don't want to stay here forever. I want to do things. I want to see things. I want to know things. So I went off to a hippie college in New Hampshire in 1976, and that was a lot of fun. But then this opportunity came up to attend the Arizona School of Midwifery in 1978. And I went there. They were the only state certifying body of lay midwives. So not nurse midwives, not in the medical field, but lay midwives. And that training normally came through women, down, it was passed down in communities and older communities. And they were actually certifying for that. We were still getting trained by other lay and nurse midwives, um, not doctors, not medical school, that kind of thing. But it was state certified, so you could actually work there, and it wasn't illegal. That was the thing, because by that time it was fairly illegal in a lot of states, including the ones I lived in,
Mm.
or came from. So so I did that, and later I finished with an arts degree because working for a living isn't as much fun. Um, but during that time when I was back in college, after having done the midwifery courses and done but the thing is, I was very young and I didn't really want the responsibility of someone else's birth, um, more than I'd done for a while. And I thought I need to grow up a little first. And I was back in college, and during that time I actually took my first weed walk, learning about the local stuff growing, in New York City, actually, with Robin Bennett, who is a wise woman herbalist, had studied with Susan Weed. So I started studying wild plants, foraging, herbalism in the wise woman tradition with Susan Weed. Um, and I've continued to make plant medicines since, even when I've lived, Alaska, California, Arizona. I like looking at the different plants, the different traditions, to see what's available there, because of course it's different. What grows is different everywhere you go. Um, then I became involved when I had kids. I became involved with women's health education. I became a certified childbirth and parenting educator through Informed Birth and Parenting. That was the group. It was also called Informed Home Birth. And I would teach classes at my house and in hospitals, birthing centers in New York City and later Alaska. I volunteered in homeless shelters. I taught women's and family health education classes through various nonprofits in New York. Nutrition. I gave free prenatal care in homeless shelters. I was an active member of the Midwives Association of New York and also the Midwives Association of North America. And in 1992, I was the program director for the International Midwives Alliance of North America conference in New York City. So I was pretty keyed into that whole movement. And natural birth, home birth, choices. That was really about choices and having an informed, being informed so you could make your own choices. So it was very non-judgmental. Epidurals weren't on the rise yet, but it was this issue of like, it had been so medicated and so hospitalized, and now it had moved back a lot towards, it kind of bounced back with the hippie era and stuff, but now it was sort of coming to the middle for everybody. What are your choices? What kind of birth do you want to have? And then you could bring that into a hospital setting, you could bring that into a birth center setting or home. And so there was this whole thing about women having choices about how they wanted to deal with their own bodies and their own body processes that were not medical, that were not, unless you had special circumstances, you were a high risk, maybe you did have diabetes, maybe that's a little different. But if you didn't need interventions, if you didn't need all this stuff, how do you just live in this body and do something natural? So that was really big then, and that was what I was a part of. I got involved with nutrition, which was another sort of piece of the puzzle, when I lived in Alaska and I worked for a USDA program and learned a lot of their lives and everything we're told today and what it's based on. And that's a whole nother workshop, which I've done here locally, actually. The history of how we got our nutritional guidelines, national nutritional guidelines, and the USDA lies, and what nutrition really is, and stuff like that. So that was kind of another piece of the health education puzzle that I've been doing. And that's how I sort of got involved in it. I think it sort of went from being interested in the plants and the wise woman tradition and stuff, and just when you have kids, suddenly you sort of fall into that whole women's breastfeeding, natural. It just sort of happens, and that's kind of how it happened for me. I have had 4 clinical abortions and 1 herbal assisted abortion. I've given birth to and raised 2 great kids. I had my tubes tied at age 35 for permanent birth control. It just was like, that's enough. And now I'm happily menopausal. In terms of Roe and the things that were happening, I think it's interesting because I've been around long enough. I was 14 when Roe et al. Versus Wade court case was won. So I know what it's like, kind of barely. I was young, but I was still aware, when these things came up, I was aware enough of your own menstruation and, how babies happen and things like that, to know what it meant then for Roe to actually win, and what a difference it would make in terms of safety for women. Um, Currently, I am living back in the Midwest with my husband and a flock of chickens. We live a sort of a homesteader lifestyle. I still make a lot of plant medicines. We're heating right now with a wood stove because we're in a bit of an FU mode with gas companies, just because I don't want to pay what they're asking for, and we're really liking the way we're living. And so we're still kind of not very mainstream. Um, we don't have a TV. We don't have cell phones. We live a really simple life. And we came back to this area. My husband's Australian, but we came back to this area because I wanted to help take care of my dad before he passed. And then we just sort of decided to stay in the small town that we live in.
Amazing. All the way to the Midwest. So can you, before we jump into the herbal stuff, can we talk about Roe v. Wade and talk about what it was when it became, when you were 14? Like what happened back then when Roe won? Like who was Roe and who was Wade? And the trajectory of where it is now, because it kind of stayed the same, right? Between that time when it got done in the courts to recently, there was nothing that shifted, really. So
there were things that shifted, which is how it got overturned, but I'll tell you about that. Yeah.
So
basically, yeah. So first of all, I think a lot of people don't understand how this country works. And to be honest, I didn't really get it until I'd lived outside the country and then came back. People think we're this one country and there's this rule of law over the country. And that's not how it works. We are different from, I think, every other country that I can find on this planet, in that we are a federation of states. And it's like we have 50 nation states with their own laws. And we have one federal banker. And the US Supreme Court interprets the Constitution. And basically, the only federal law that trumps state laws is the US Constitution. And the Supreme Court interprets when that is challenged to determine, is this US constitutional or is this not, right? Does it fall under that or not, or does it go back to states? So that's how that works. And like the president's job is to defend the Constitution and secure our borders against a foreign enemy. That's the president's job. That's it. So, we give the president a whole lot more, than they're supposed to be doing, but that's really that's their job. So each state makes its own laws regarding abortion, basically, and had been doing that. It's important to note that Roe never made abortion legal. It never made it legal. It never gave us abortion rights. There's no such thing as a right to an abortion in this country, anywhere. Actually, there is in the state of Kansas where I live. There is a right to, but it's not. It's kind of worded funny, because it's technically elective surgery. It's not real unless it's for the health and well-being of the person. Medically speaking, it's elective surgery. And there's a difference between legality and emotion. That's my right, that kind of thing. And there's a balance there. And this is what Roe sort of sidestepped entirely in a really unique way, which made it possible for women to get abortions. So what happened was Roe et al., meaning and other people, versus Wade was a class action lawsuit. It's not a bill and it's not a law. Basically, what I understand from it comes from reading the court documents themselves. So it's not too difficult to read. My brother's a lawyer. I used to work for the New York City District Attorney, so I have some understanding of legalese and that sort of thing. So it's not too hard to read and understand what happened in it. And actually, the resource document I sent you with all these links has the link to the document, which is up on the Cornell University website. So anyone can actually read it. So it was a class action suit. There were several arguments brought forth by 4 people involved in the suit. 2 of them were a couple. Their arguments were thrown out pretty quickly because they were really dumb. Another one was a doctor who had 2 counts against him for performing illegal abortions, which means not medically necessary. at the time. And then the fourth person called herself Jane Roe. Her name is actually Norma McCorvey. And her argument was that state laws limiting or criminalizing abortion were unconstitutional in that they violated the due process clause of the 9th and 14th Amendments. That's her thing. So it had something to do with privacy. If you boil it all down, it has to do with privacy. So the courts decided, they recognized that abortion was a privacy issue. And because of that, states would have to go through the full due process of a criminal court case while maintaining the privacy of the woman, which is impossible to do that. So it made prosecution of the laws that were still standing in their states, if it was illegal or some variation of abortion, how late in the pregnancy, if it was illegal in any way or limited, they just couldn't prosecute. It was too expensive. So they just stopped. When Roe won, they just stopped prosecuting. It didn't make it legal anywhere. So it's kind of interesting. And it says in section 119 of the court documents, it says, clearly, therefore, the court today is correct in holding that the right asserted by Jane Roe is embraced within the personal liberty protected by the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. So it had to do with privacy according to then due process of law according to the 14th Amendment. The court then started talking about that states could still regulate abortions, for example, limiting it to medical necessity, save the life of the mother, mainly in late-term abortions. So that means after 20 weeks when the fetus is viable, meaning it can live outside the womb. Then in section 124, it did add, the court's opinion decides that a state may impose virtually no restriction on the performance of abortions during the first trimester of pregnancy. The first trimester is the first 12 weeks since from conception to 12 weeks, that's the first trimester. There's 3 trimesters in a pregnancy. Now, the reason why Roe has been on shaky ground for 49 years. It's not ironclad. When you use words like opinion, may, and virtually in one sentence, though it turned out that states, basically ended up legalizing abortion, even if they didn't, up to 12 weeks. It was now under the Constitution, you could get that. Or not under the Constitution, but the Supreme Court determined that, they shouldn't, basically, they may not virtually, that kind of thing, impose restrictions, and that it was just too expensive to prosecute. The reality was, what we were all living with was, oh, now you can get an abortion up to 12 weeks. So for my whole entire adult life, it was, you can get an abortion, a clinical abortion, a clean clinical abortion, up to 12 weeks gestation. Okay, but I grew up with this idea of a time limit. Most people know they're pregnant by about the 6th week. Your breasts hurt, you're feeling a little nauseous, you've missed a period, it's starting to, you're pretty much getting a clue there, and you've probably taken, you've either gone to, at the time you had to go to a doctor to get a test, a blood test. Then the home tests came out many years later. But you had a choice. You had some choices you could make. And the clinics were clean, and that was great. So when it was overturned, then actually lately, when Roe was overturned, I kept hearing before that about questions about Planned Parenthood and other clinics and what they're doing. It's not right. And I'm like, what are people talking about? Well, apparently, fetal tissue is valuable to Big Pharma. Fetal tissue is hugely valuable in their research and development, and they pay big for it. So what was happening was clinics were doing later term abortions than were legally acceptable in their states, and pushing the legal limits over and over and over because they got paid more for the fetal tissue when there was more of it and it was older in gestational age. So for 49 years, the people who were not pro-choice could not overturn Roe. They couldn't have it re-examined. But the reason they were able to do it now is because Big Pharma got greedy. And so did the clinics. Hospitals were being paid for tissue that might have occurred in a car accident, a baby doesn't make, that's fine. That was also happening. And to be fair, the majority of the work that Planned Parenthood does is not abortions. It's health education, it's birth control, but the majority of money they make was from the sale of fetal tissue. So it became a problem. And if the clinics in Big Pharma hadn't just gotten greedy, and if the government had just slapped everybody on the wrist and said, don't do that. We've got to, get this back in line. And, then Roe would not have been overturned. But our government's not going to go up against Big Pharma because our government's a big pussy and isn't going to do it because they get kickbacks from Big Pharma. So it's not going to happen. So what were they going to do? We'll just let them overturn Roe and stay out of, try to overturn Roe and stay out of it. And that's what happened. They were able to, so the people who were not pro-choice were able to provide evidence of this malfeasance and were able to get Roe overturned because of the greed and the profits and that, because it was fetuses over 20 weeks and it was not medical necessity. These were abortions of convenience. I don't want to have a baby. It's not the right time. Come back in 4 weeks. Well, that's past your 12 weeks. Now maybe it's 16 weeks. Now maybe it's 18 weeks. It might have been 22 weeks when this fetus is viable and could live outside the womb. And so there was proof. It was brought forth. And so Roe was overturned. The problem and the reason why people freaked out, of course, is because, first of all, they misunderstood Roe. They thought Roe made abortion legal. And now our right to an abortion has been taken away. So that misunderstanding has to be cleared up. Roe did not make it legal. Roe didn't give us a right to abortion. But effectively it did, but it didn't legally. And so having it overturned did not take any rights from us, and it did not make it illegal. It simply gave the legality of abortion back to the states, because now we have no constitutional safety net for it currently.
But that sounds like it could be like a reset almost. So like if I say I was a woman of childbearing age and I had an issue with my state's abortion rights, I could deal with my state instead of federally. Or you could go down the rabbit hole of federal again. But
yes, and there is a way to do it. I think there's a way to do it that would be better. But and I can talk about that later. But it's like, in terms of like what can we do? But yeah, you can. And just right now, a lot of people are just going to the next state to have an abortion if they need one, if it is now illegal in their state.
So, how did Big Pharma win from this overturn?
Well, they did not, because they're going to lose business.
That's what I thought.
Right. But it was so horrifying. What was going on was, it's because the government wouldn't slap people on the wrist. They would not prosecute Planned Parenthood. And I'm going to use Planned Parenthood just because they're the largest ones we know. Mm-hmm. But they weren't going to prosecute hospitals. They weren't going to prosecute Planned Parenthood. They certainly weren't going to turn around and prosecute Big Pharma, knowing where that fetal tissue was coming from. They weren't going to sue everybody or prosecute them for breaking the law, breaking the law on gestational age of the fetal matter that was being sold. They just weren't going to do it.
So to settle that, somehow it got overturned, and now Big Pharma and other people can't prey on those late-term pregnancies that are.
Yeah, it'll be much more difficult for them to say, come back later. They'll have to do it within the states where it is still legal. It's going to have to be up to the state to make sure, which they weren't doing before, but to make sure that those clinics are operating within the legal requirements and regulations set by that state. And
But
states where it is legal, yeah.
but if you went to a private doctor, a gynecologist, wouldn't that be your business if it's an elective? It's nobody's business, it's my business.
Right. And that's, and it was, and privacy was the issue under Roe.
Yeah.
But it is, right. But, and see, that's right. Except, not all, except there are questions. It's, it's a life and there are questions, and it is tricky because not all doctors will perform abortions. And they're not necessarily super religious or anything. It's like first of all, no one can prove when consciousness enters those cells. No one can say. You can say it's a life physically. There's physical growth, cells are growing, you know, absolutely. But no one can say when there's consciousness or a soul in those cells. No one can. So, which is why there were plenty of doctors and people who were willing to, you know, and happy to help with these procedures, because up to a certain point, you know, they were at least like, well, it can't live outside the body anyway. You know, it's only like this big. It's like, you know, it's like it can't at 12 weeks. It's not, you know, it can't survive. You know, and I don't know if it's a person or not, like consciousness wise. So, you know, or they felt that it wasn't. I mean, they were fine to do that. And even so, a lot of people weren't. A lot of us aren't. We don't know. I'm like, I don't know if it was a lot, you know, a person with consciousness that I don't know. But uh but we make our choices. Life is hard and we make hard choices. And
Some
that's
would
just
say
part of it.
the life
So
we live is just
yeah. So
a
it's just,
bunch of choices. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. And this is tricky. You know, it's very tricky because there aren't like ironclad answers to all of that. I think there's probably still stuff being sold to big pharma. I'm sure there is. The question is, I think it's less is going to big pharma right now. And you have to understand that the fetal tissue that goes to them, they freeze. It's there. They've got plenty of it. It's just that it's continuously used for research and development. So having a steady stream of it is always a lovely thing for them. If they don't get it from us, they'll get it from other countries. I'm not too worried about that, you know, for them. But you know, so it's going to keep happening because there's also the back alley abortion or the illegal stuff that was already going on, and it will continue to go on. And it might be through medical professionals, you know, still might be clean stuff going to, you know, clean abortion, not to worry, you know, I'm not too worried about where big pharma is going to get their stuff. They'll still have a supply, I'm sure. I don't think it'll be quite as plentiful, but but then the worry for women is, you know, the big thing was, oh, there go my rights. Well, we know, no, that's not what happened. But there is a big worry in that, then where can I go that's clean? What can I do that is within my power? You know, like where is my and I think that's the biggest question. It wasn't, you know, the biggest complaint is not my rights are gone, or they've taken my rights, or they've made it illegal, you know, which none of those things happen. The question goes back to, what are my options? Where can I go to take care of myself? Is it in my state? Is it in the state that's, you know, I live 6 miles from the border to a state where it's illegal, and it's legal in mine, but people are coming to this state from there, you know, and it's, you know, not a problem, but it's, you know, so, but where can I go? What can I do? What are my options? And the thing is, a lot of people, the worry is that the only option is the back alley abortion, which is somebody, maybe even a nurse, is doing this in their own home, maybe with or without the proper equipment, maybe with or somebody with or without the proper knowledge. And the method used for clinical abortion is basically breaking and entering. You have to dilate the cervical os. So at the end of the vagina where the cervix is, that the os is the opening, you have to dilate that so that you can get the instrument in. Something has to go inside and scrape or suck out the tissue, the thickened endometrium of the uterus and the fetus. things can go very wrong here, even in a safe, modern clinical situation or a hospital. Uh, Infection, you've now opened a wound, you now have bleeding, open bleeding that has to clamp down, or you may have just introduced bacteria into the vagina. Perforation, you can poke holes into the uterus or the vaginal walls. And hemorrhage, uncontrolled bleeding from perforation or from tissue being left behind, um, which leaves an open wound because the uterus can't clamp down. It's like when you hemorrhage after a childbirth because there's a little bit of placenta left. There's something stuck on the wall, and so all those blood vessels around it can't clamp down properly and stop bleeding. So it's like if a little tissue is left, you could hemorrhage. And so there's a worry that we're going to go back to, what if my only option is an unsafe clinical abortion locally? So those are huge concerns, which is why I think it's so important for women to have the information that I want to share about the options, including plant medicines that can help us have more choices other than going to another state maybe, or having a clinical abortion. Even if you have a safe clinical abortion available to you, you might try one of these other things first and just have a very natural passing through and get your period.
So before we move on to the herbal extraction, when somebody has to physically go in and do the dilation and the scraping and all of that, how many weeks along would a person be before that had to happen? Like, I'm thinking about my friend who was pregnant recently, and she was, I think, at 6 weeks, and she took the pills.
Yeah.
But she didn't have to have anything, extracted
Right.
physically. So is that somebody who's after the 12 weeks who normally has to have that? Or is it?
No, that would be done before the 12 weeks. That
Oh,
extraction, because after that 12 weeks, you might still use that procedure, but now you have a larger body with bones and or cartilage at least, and that's a little harder to get out with a small tube that's the size of a straw.
oh.
Sorts. So you need some other things. So up to 12 weeks, you can do this extraction, that what I just
So
described.
it's a
But
taste.
before that, it's much tinier.
Hmm.
So having things in your body like those pills or herbs that do the same thing or plants that do the same thing, they are basically helping your body just release that entire tissue of the uterus, which holds that teeny tiny microscopic to quarter of an inch bit of tissue. And that is earlier. That is up to about 8 or 9 weeks. You
Mm-hmm.
can do that. After that, you're probably looking at either other herbal medicines that are stronger, that will help it release, or a physical procedure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we should talk about the kind of pharma, like what I was saying my friend had. I believe she went to a Planned Parenthood, and they gave her 2 pills.
Mm-hmm.
One that she had to take right away, and then she needed to take the second one like 24 hours later. And her experience was that she bled a lot for a couple of weeks. She was 6 weeks along when she took the pill, and she just started being regular again. But she had a lot of questions about hormones and stuff like that, which I think we'll get into more when you're talking about the herbs.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so what do you know about the the big pharma, or just the Western, really the Western approach to
Yeah. So
this?
those pills are called mifepristone and misoprostol, and I'll explain them in a second. But I actually want to explain the basic anatomy of conception, because to understand what those things do to you, you have to understand what conception actually is. So, first of all, I think the bottom line on the anatomy of conception and understanding how any of this works on your body, whether it's plants whether it's meditation, whether it's the pharma, whatever it is, like the pharma pills. You have to understand that if you have penetration sex and allow sperm inside your vagina, you can get pregnant. We have to stop running around going, I fought 100 years for these rights and I can have sex and it's great. Well, okay, but your biology doesn't care about all of your women's rights. If you have penetration sex, like I think bodily autonomy begins with body awareness. And you can't have that awareness when your brain is constantly apprehending data outside and thinking everybody's going to save you out there, which is very big on our culture. You never look inward. So understanding things like, how do we even conceive? How would these pills even work? So that when you make your choices, you're making them out of some knowledge of yourself, I think is really significant. So first of all, we don't have eggs in our ovaries. We're talking about, when you're born with all your eggs. You don't have eggs in your ovaries. You have follicles in your ovaries. And about 12 to 13 days after menstruating, you have a hormone, a follicular stimulating hormone that is produced that stimulates follicles to turn into eggs. So a few of those follicles start making eggs, not all of them, a few of them, and then they jostle for place. They try to get close to the edge of the ovary because there's no opening in the ovary. And one of them is going to win this contest and burst out of the ovary, is what it does. And all the others are left behind to pretty much just dissolve. The winning egg bursts out of the ovary. And basically, as the egg leaves the ovary, it leaves behind a kind of a yellowish coating called the lutein. The luteinizing hormone from this thing now is produced and tells the lining of the uterus to start to prepare for possible implantation. It's like, okay, egg on the way, yelling down the fallopian tube, egg on the way, prepare, and so and this coating, once it's left behind, is called the corpus luteum, and it produces now it starts to produce progesterone. Progesterone is what creates life. It creates the lining in the uterus. It makes everything ready for that embryo to implant. And if the embryo implants, then after about 8 weeks, the placenta that's forming starts to produces the progesterone. But up until then, it's that lining of that ova that got out. So most of the time, fertilization doesn't happen, right? So we'd say, hello, it's coming down, but then nothing happens. And it doesn't implant, and it all just gets washed away in your period, right? Let's see. And the corpus luteum shrinks up. It stops producing progesterone. We shed our egg and the endometrial lining, and we have our period. And there's a certain amount of fertilized eggs that just never implant. You just get your period. I read somewhere it was between 12 and 20%, and I'm like, I don't know about that, but it's that's what I've read, is that there's a lot of fertilized eggs that just never implant. They don't have to implant just because they've been fertilized. So sperm can live 5 to 7 days once it's deposited. This means you can have sex and then days later ovulate, and you're still at risk to get pregnant because the sperm is still hanging around. And the egg gets fertilized in the in the fallopian tubes. That's where the egg actually gets fertilized. It takes about 5 to 18 days for that egg to travel down to the uterus and implant. So it takes time, right? And so we have this window, and I think that's the thing, is that we have this window of, if we understand conception, and how much time it takes for that thing to even implant, and how much time it takes to even produce a placenta that's creating progesterone. There's a lot of time in there to interrupt this process, right? So you have to figure out where we want to mess with nature if we don't want to have a baby, and place some kind of obstacle in its place, whether it's preventing it from implanting, or releasing it once it's been implanted, or preventing ovulation. I mean, there's a lot of things we can do in this process if we understand what conception is. It becomes to be within the woman's power to interfere with ovulation, or the endometrium, or even interfere with the sperm, block the sperm, or lower the production. So first of all, we have all of that. Knowing how it works helps us work on prevention. So I can talk about prevention, because actually what you're asking about with those pills actually comes with pregnancy release. So if you want to cover prevention of pregnancy first, we can do that real quick, which includes the birth control pill, stuff like that, but very quickly. And then it gets to pregnancy release, which is where those pills come in.
Got you.
So do you want me to cover prevention of ovulation real quick?
Yeah,
Because
let's
there are
talk
some.
about that because I mean, you're right. That's how people get pregnant, you know? And with so many people getting pregnant, clearly there's a lack of awareness. And like, I remember I was on the pill for like a month when I was 16 and I was still a virgin. And I got my period the entire month and it scared the crap out of me. So I threw it away and I never took it ever again in my life. And I was just talking to the same person who she used to be on the pill, but it caused her so many problems. Like she said she got dark hairs growing on her chest and like other things like that. So after a couple of years on it, she stopped taking it. And then I know that there's the arm thing and you know there's there's you can talk about that. And then of
Yeah,
course
yeah.
the old fashioned condom, which is something that was the only thing that I ever used was a condom after that month.
Right. I won't go over all the medical methods
No.
because women can go get that from Planned Parenthood or all that knowledge. And basically, they're either barriers, like a diaphragm or a condom or both, with or without spermicidal. There's the IUD. And then there's the hormones, which could be in the arm, which could be a daily pill. Uh, so and and uh, and actually, it's only the hormones, or the hormone emulator, which is the pill. Um, that's the only one that actually prevents ovulation, right? The others are just barriers or irritants. Like the IUD is an irritant, so that things just don't implant generally because it's just constantly irritating the inside of the uterus. Which, in fact, women used to insert a midwife or your old lady in the village used to insert a tiny pebble into the uterus, which would do the same. But before we ever had an IUD, so there was always something in there and you couldn't get pregnant. So that was the pre-IUD method of irritating the uterine lining enough so that nothing would implant. So that's sort of a method. And the others are barriers, the diaphragm and the condom. So in order to prevent ovulation, the pharma way is the birth control pill. It prevents ovulation by tricking the body into thinking it's already pregnant. If you're pregnant, you can't get pregnant. You're not going to ovulate. So basically, you are tricking your body into thinking you're pregnant. The thing is, the funny part about that is you can still get pregnant through the pill. Nothing is foolproof. I got pregnant through the pill. The only time I ever got pregnant when I wasn't trying to was through birth control, including the pill. So nothing is foolproof. Not the herbs, not medical methods, nothing is foolproof. But generally speaking, they work. There's also in pharma, there's an emergency morning after pill, which is not the same pills your friend took. The morning after pill prevents or delays ovulation by a few days. So if you had sex, that sperm that's sitting there for 5 to 7 days, the goal is that you won't ovulate. And so during that time, and so you won't conceive. That's the goal of the emergency morning after pill. Doesn't mean you can't get pregnant, but it gives you a little more protection from getting pregnant. Sort of an emergency birth control pill. The birth control was made originally from wild yam, but only one variety of wild yam. Although yesterday I found a huge number of articles about the wrong variety in relation to the pill, which I couldn't fit. And they were like medical papers, studies of Dioscorea villosa, and I'm like, that's not the right one. It doesn't have enough of the stuff. So diosgenin is the hormone emulator that was synthesized from wild yam in Mexico. It's Dioscorea mexicana is the variety, and the earliest birth control pills were made from this one variety of wild yam. Basically, it was a chemistry professor went down to Mexico and noticed what people were taking, and he managed to synthesize this hormone, and he found that it blocked uh, it kept you from getting pregnant. And he came up to the US labs and they were like, oh, we don't care. So he went back to the lab where he had talked to these people down in Mexico, and they started a whole new company called Syntex Labs. And that's the birth control pills were made by Syntex Labs in Mexico, and they were sold all over the world. US bought them, sold all over the world, um, until they started to discover high levels of breast cancer in women who took birth control pills, because when you go through perimenopause and menopause, you stop producing certain estrogens, not all estrogen, but certain of them. Estradiol is the most, the active ingredient. It's the biggest one that stops being produced. But if you replace that with hormone replacement therapy, or if you have a lot of it through your birth control pill, that particular estrogen is implicated in breast cancer growth. It feeds breast cancers, basically. So there's a wisdom when your body stops making certain hormones that you will not succumb to certain diseases. So it's like I wouldn't do a hormone replacement because I don't want the thing that my body is saying I shouldn't have anymore. It's that kind of wisdom. So then other labs started developing low dose birth control pills, low, so varying degrees of the hormone stuff. But basically what it did was trick your body into it raised progesterone levels. So your body thought you were producing progesterone, and so you must be pregnant, basically. So that's what it did. So some people use wild yam root instead of the birth control pill. Like birth control, you have to take it every day. I don't know of anyone who uses wild yam root. It has to be the particular wild yam, the Dioscorea mexicana. You can get it. I have it in that resource document. You can get it at swansonsvitamins.com. There is a dose. It seems to be 400 milligram tablets in the morning and 3 at night. And don't miss a dose, or just like birth control pills, you can get pregnant. There are unpleasant side effects, nausea, vomiting, etc. Like any pharmacology or anything, it's mostly stomach related because you just stuck all this stuff in your stomach. Let's see what else about that one. Yeah, that was it for wild yam. But I don't know anyone who uses it. It's widely used by Spanish New Mexicans, oddly enough. So people who've come up from Mexico, they're more familiar with it. So honestly, if I was going to use it, I would either want to talk to a midwife or someone who has actual experience using wild yam root, or I would actually go talk to people further south who know how to use it. But not many people I know have ever used it. I remember it being used when I was in my teens and 20s, but I've heard of it and knew of it, but that didn't seem to be something that continued in the tradition that I am in. All the people I knew just didn't use it. Now, prevention in terms of sperm, other than barrier. So if you spin off to the other side of this coin, if we're not going to prevent eggs from forming, can we prevent the sperm from reaching the egg or not being viable? So condoms and diaphragms are effective, not 100%, but they're helpful. Women in Europe and other countries have been acidifying their vaginas before intercourse to kill sperm. And this is actually still being used today. One method that is also used in Europe is to take 1,000 milligram capsule of ascorbic acid, insert it way up into the vagina, and let it dissolve before intercourse, because sperm hates an acid environment, and it's said to be quite effective. Another method is heat. Sperm hates heat. So if both a man and a woman can sit in very hot water, like a nice sauna or a hot tub for 3 to 6 days for a couple hours a day, there have been tests that have shown sperm count is either very low or they become very immobile for up to a week. So there's that. and then there's the issue of sex itself. You can have all the sex you want and not get pregnant, just don't have intercourse. It's like there are all kinds of sexes you can have. It's like oral sex. There's everything, you know, you masturbate together. There's just like everything other than penetration if you don't want to get pregnant. So, you know, there's that. There's also methods of natural birth control. And a really good book is called A Cooperative Method of Natural Birth Control by Margaret Knopfseger, which is also on that list. It's sort of rhythm method on steroids, which includes basal body temperature. You can tell when you're ovulating very, very easily with her. And also the when you stick your fingers up you and you are getting close to ovulating or ovulating, so like in between, if you went like this, it would be like a little like mashed potato. It doesn't form a thread of mucus. When you're ovulating or getting close, it forms a thread, your own juices. So that's enough. So if you couple all those together, and she teaches how to do that in that book. To be honest, I was so regular. And I was with my first husband for I don't know how many years. We were together 8 years without getting pregnant, and we never used birth control. I used rhythm alone, and sometimes the temperature and this, because I was so regular, and I knew my body. So I knew when I was getting fertile. So we just wouldn't have sex during those days, and that was enough to not get pregnant. Which is, you know, because usually when they say, you know, what do you call men who use rhythm as a method? Daddy, you know, because it doesn't work unless you're using it the right way, you know, unless you really know what you're doing. You know, rhythm's as good as pulling out. You're still having sex and still depositing sperm. So you have to know how the body works. You have to be in touch with it. And I like her methods because you're using other things like a certain body temperature range that changes when you're ovulating, the consistency of your own juices, which changes as you get close to ovulating. So there's other ways to know other than just the timing, because your timing of your ovulation can change. You don't know. So, but those are prevention ways in terms of ovulation, and then after all that, you start to get to pregnancy release, which is when we get to your friend's pills. Mm-hmm. And how that all works. So, which you could call an abortion, but a lot of people call it pregnancy release because it sounds nicer and doesn't seem to come with the stigma and the emotional. I think it sounds nicer too, a pregnancy release. It's like you're aware of what you're doing when you say that.
Yeah.
Psychologically and emotionally, I think.
You're releasing the potential of having a child.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's much fun. I learned the rhythm method in high school. I went to a Catholic high school, and as seniors in high school, our teacher taught us that. And I remember, because I was joking about it with my friends, I was like, sticky, sticky. And she said to us, she said, now that I've taught you the rhythm method, please use condoms because my 18-year-old daughter got pregnant and I am now a grandmother. So please use a condom. But she was cool. I really enjoyed that class. I thought it was a great class, you know, because it was boys and girls. It was a co-ed Catholic high school. So we weren't just in females. She was teaching the entire class. But that was awesome. I mean, it's learning the biochemistry of yourself. It's powerful. But I can see what you mean. Like, you really have to be in tune with yourself, really know yourself. So it's a journey, I think, to know that part of you. Yeah.
So you're just that much younger than I am, because human reproduction biology in my high school, it was a public high school, and it was a big high school in a fairly big city. Girls had their own it was a year long, but girls had their own, like, you could take biology, female, it was reproductive sciences, and girls took one from these teachers and boys took it from those teachers, and we were separated. we were not together. And it wasn't all birth control. It was, you know, it was the whole reproductive biology of humans, you know, and it was like it was like a year long. I don't know how it was, maybe it was a semester, but it was like, it was separated. They
Well,
would not do it together.
get this. This wasn't a biology class. It was a religious ed class. They didn't teach it in body
Oh,
sciences or like the home ec kind of stuff. They literally
yeah.
taught it to us in a religious educational class.
Wow.
I know. I
You had
feel
a
like that's
good
quite
teacher.
progressive. They also
Yeah.
taught us how to meditate. So
Oh,
I
nice.
think they gave the lay teachers quite a bit of space. But anyway, so I have a lot of fond memories of this school. I only went there for 2 years. But yeah. So religious education was the rhythm,
Nice.
not the Bible.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. So what is the
So
herbal?
we're up to her pill if you want to.
Oh,
Well, we're up to
that's
her
where we're
pill.
at.
Yeah, we're up to her pill. Oh, where are my notes here?
Or
Lost
should
my
we
thing.
should we bounce from, so we just talked about prevention using
Yes.
um yam. I mean, nat, we went over like the Western, and then the pharma, I mean the non-pharma, the herbal, we talked about wild yam root, rhythm method, condoms, really, heat, ascorbic acid.
Hmm.
So those were all the things that can help prevent it.
Right.
Like, you know, like natural, what do you call that? Oh, I'm gonna have to edit this.
Plant medicine. Well, they're not all you know, because the heat and stuff like that, that's not medicine. It's just
No, it's not medicine, but it's natural.
non pharmacological,
That's the word.
non pharmacological
Non-pharmacological
methods of
options.
interrupting ovulation.
Yeah. All right. So
Now,
now we're gonna
yeah,
talk about um now we're gonna talk about the pill that my friend took once she was pregnant. She was already
right.
pregnant.
So, yeah. So her pill comes between two different methods that are plant based, right? In terms of on the scale of releasing a pregnancy, there's one that it sort of falls at the end of prevention, but before the hard work that she had to go through, which could be done pharmacologically or plant medicine. So there's one that comes sort of in between. And that's the one that I think most people would probably be interested in, because it's the one that you it's a little bit like that morning after pill, but a little like, it's like the condom broke. Oh, the condom broke. What do I do? Right? Um, and it's the one that's most often used, and has been used. There's like there's historical evidence. 2,500 years ago, this was used. Hippocrates would
Wow.
prescribe this. So yeah. So and this one, and actually after I describe this, then her pill fits in, and then the non-pharmacological way to do it instead of her pills, right? So they're kind of equal, but they're just the pharmacological way and the non-pharmacological. But this one is sort of in between total prevent, the best prevention I can do, and an actual pregnancy release, because you might actually have a pregnancy, and you may this one is you may catch it, you know, and prevent it, or it may actually you may actually conceive, and you might even have implanted barely. So it's kind of in that time frame there. And this one is, that's the seeds that I've shown you, the Queen Anne's lace seeds. So, and this has been around a long time now. There was an entire city, I think it was called Saint Cyrene, and which is, I guess, now on the Libyan coast. It was built on the money made by selling something called, I think Silpion was the name of it. There was a plant that was widely used as a abortifacient and also an emmenagogue, meaning to get your period. So they made their money on this plant, and it was used for hundreds of years to prevent pregnancy and or to get rid of early pregnancy until it was harvested out into extinction by the 4th century AD. The closest pharmacologically in terms of in the same plant family and having the same medical activity, pharmacological activity, the closest we get is a plant called Queen Anne's lace. Queen Anne's lace is based, I don't have it fresh, but Queen Anne's lace is a white flower that would open up to look, let's see, let's get a real open one. So it would, I have the seed bundle here. So you can look at it, it's a beautiful white flower. It's an umbral. It's like an umbrella. It's beautiful. And then it folds up into this thing that we call it a bird's nest. Looks like a little bird's nest. And the seeds are in there. And then it opens up again like this. Actually opens up as seeds. And then they fall all over the place, and grasshoppers love them. So you get them at that point, and it's the seeds we're looking for. So, and these things grow in ditches by the side of the road. They grow everywhere, Queen Anne's lace. So, and actually, what do I have here? I have where you can actually see the seeds. I glued some onto a piece of paper. They're little tiny seeds, kind of Velcro-y. They kind of stick to you a little bit, little tiny things. And they have been used for centuries and centuries, as a, to prevent pregnancy and to release a pregnancy super early. So basically it's, when we talked about preventing ovulation, this actually prevents the endometrium in your uterus from becoming a good nesty lining and home for an embryo to form. That's what it does. So that's your prevention. It's an implantation preventer. It inhibits the production of progesterone. But that's not all they do, but it's one of the most important factors in interrupting pregnancy. Because remember, progesterone was making that lovely uterine lining for the egg to implant in. And if we inhibit progesterone, we make that lining less nesty and inviting. So it's easier to stop the corpus luteum from producing progesterone than it is to stop the placenta from producing progesterone. So if we can do it before it gets firmly implanted, so that we then have to take those pharmacological pills, get a clinical abortion, or take the other herbs, which are harder on the body, like those pills your friend took. If we could do that earlier, that's better. And that's what Queen Anne's lace seeds do. So basically, you want to take it as soon as you think you should. You've had unprotected sex, or the condom broke. That's the time to use Queen Anne's lace seeds. It's a bit like a morning after pill, but it's not just a pop a pill and Bob's your uncle. It's a little more to it. You have to chew or crush the seeds and taste, take and taste 1 teaspoon of Queen Anne's lace seeds per day for 6 days. I have seen people recommend a tea or a tincture. That is not effective, because it's the terpenes, which are the aromatic constituents, that are the most effective part, that will tell your body, stop producing, interrupt the production of progesterone. So you can take it until you get your period, but that's a bit of overkill. You don't have to. If you take it for 6 days, that's enough. It changes the effectiveness of the progesterone. The egg just sort of slips out. And actually, this plant grows in probably everywhere but the desert in the United States, but it also grows in India, in the Rajasthan state, and they use it there quite a bit. And they have books that explain it. And there's a book in India that explains this. They use 1 tablespoon per day for 3 days. But here we just do, and in the end, you're getting the same 3 tablespoons, but we just do it here. I've been told it's 1 teaspoon a day for 6 days. And they've been using it over there for centuries, and it's been working fine. So where do you find these seeds? Pretty much everywhere. The main problem is that there's a huge look-alike that is extremely poisonous and will kill you, and that is poison hemlock. So you either need to get the seeds from someone you know. Well, first of all, poison hemlock doesn't have seeds like this. But if you're looking at a plant by the side of the road and you think you have the right one, you better darn well know that you have the right one, because you could be taking poison hemlock and kill yourself within an hour of taking it. So yeah, you need to, if you don't know how to forage for Queen Anne's lace, or you don't quite know what it looks like, don't do it. Get the seeds that are already dried, already prepared from someone you know. But if you do start foraging and you do start looking and you go, well, is this Queen Anne's lace? And if you look in a book, you can easily tell the difference. There are very clear differences. First of all, Queen Anne's lace is the Latin name is Daucus carota, as in carrot. This is the plant that is the precursor. This is the ancestor of all modern carrots. So it smells carroty, and poison hemlock does not. So if you crush the seeds in your hand, crunch them up in your hands and smell them. If you pull out a root and smell it, the whole plant smells carroty, right? And chervil, which looks like it does not, cow parsley, which looks like it does not, water hemlock, which looks a little like the flower bundle, does not, and poison hemlock, they don't smell carroty at all. Not all of those are toxic, but they don't smell carroty. Also, you'll find people say, well, the queen has hairy legs. That's because the stalk of Queen Anne's lace is hairy, is a little hairy, and none of the others, the flower stalk is hairy, and none of those other plants they're all smooth. So if you find a beautiful white umbral of flowers and the stalk is hairy, the queen has hairy legs. She has not shaved, and that's more likely Queen Anne's lace. And then you can start smelling it. Does it smell carroty and all of that? So if you go to forage yourself, it's quite easy to forage Queen Anne's lace. So you have to know how to identify it. But while the flowers may look like the little white flower bundles, the seed bundles don't. None of those other plants create a sort of a bird's nest like this and then open back up into this seed bundle. None of them do that. So that's a way to figure out if you found the right thing. And the reason why you would look for it is because it's widely available. It's within our power. These things grow everywhere. If you find them growing and you let them reseed, you're going to come back the next year and it's 4 times bigger areas full of Queen Anne's lace. I'm very lucky because my neighbor has a field. They let me wander their 12 acres. And I went out this last 2 years. And if you think you only need 6 teaspoons of it, it's not a lot. But if you try to buy Queen Anne's lace seeds from anybody, it costs a fortune. Nobody sells them. They might sell a few in a packet to grow some Queen Anne's lace. Part of that problem is there's another flower called bishop's weed that they sometimes call Queen Anne's lace, and it's not the same thing. It's not toxic, but it won't help you with your pregnancy problems. And you can't get it. You won't get 6 teaspoons of seeds in a packet of seeds. If you actually ask for Queen Anne's lace seeds, it's going to cost a fortune. But I have 2 bags like this. I went and scarfed so much because I knew when Roe was overturned, women are probably going to want this stuff. So I just decided to just go get it and have it, even if it means selling seeds to people to grow their own Queen Anne's lace, so that they always have a method that they can use. So you have to know how to identify them, but you gather the seeds when they're brown. They're very expensive to buy, so you want to try to gather them. And if you're going to do that, gather enough for a friend as well, right? To have enough so that, foraging rules are basically don't take more than 1/3 of any patch, but you want to try to literally it's just a few bundles of those. You've got a field full. You only need a few handfuls of those dried up seeds, and you've got plenty for yourself and your friends. So I also have a list of where you can buy the seeds, a couple of places to buy the seeds to grow your own in that resource I gave you. 20 grams is 6 teaspoonfuls. That can cost $70 from places that sell these seeds. Not for this use, but for field planting. And that's a lot of seed if you consider they're about sesame seed size. So it's easier just to grow your own or go into fields and forage them. As for the scientific studies have been done to show anti-progestogenic activity, disruption of the antioxidant protection of the embryo, and anti-estrogenic effect, resulting in anti-implantation effects, which produces the abortive fashion activity. That's the science of what these seeds do. And 2 studies are noted in the document I gave you that explain the science of Queen Anne's lace seeds. So it's a bit of a prevention as well as a release method, but it's the super early one. Now we're up to your friend's pills, the pharmacological pregnancy release, and the herbal pregnancy release methods. So that's how far we've come. It's a lot of information.
It is, but it's fascinating. I mean, yeah, I'm past ever having children, but I find that what I'm attracted to in this conversation is that every woman gets her period. So that's a lot of people on this planet. And that we don't have to be so attached to Western medicine and pharmacological options, that there are other options. And I like to hear about those options. And with that, you want to know all the intricacies from someone like you who knows what it is and also has like 2 giant bagfuls of it in her living room.
Yeah, I'm like, I have all this as some, because when Roe was overturned, people were freaking out, and I knew that there's a field full last year, so I went over again this year, and I thought, well, and I had gotten quite a lot last year anyway, but I just thought, maybe I'll get more, because I just thought if people are freaking out, if it's that bad, which it didn't get that bad, but in a few states, but if it's that bad and women are freaking out and we can share this information, we're going to need to have sources of this stuff.
Yeah.
We're going to need women who have gardens are going to need to start growing this stuff to have available, and including the plant method that will do the same thing as the pills that your friend took. So we have options in, that we're growing. I mean, a lot of people have medicinal flower gardens, for their own medicines, for their own feverfew and, catnip tea and, various things that yarrow for fevers. And when we grow these beautiful wild flowers in herbal gardens in our backyard, a lot of women are getting into that now. A lot of homesteader women and young mothers and, people who are interested in having these natural medicines handy, just basic ones. Oregano is very antibiotic, like people will grow it so they grow these wonderful herbal gardens with some wild plants, some conventional herbal stuff for both, culinary as well as medicinal. Well, there's no reason why we can't grow some of these other things as well to cover this area of our health and our well-being and our uses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is why you are the wild mother. So now we are at the pharmacological extraction release, I'll say release of the pregnancy.
Yeah. So these are called abortion pills and it is for pregnancy release, but they all are called abortion. So I want the abortion pills. So there are 2 of them. They are used up to 9 weeks gestation. So from conception to 9 weeks after conception is when the window of using these pills is. The 2 pills are called mifepristone, which halts the progesterone production mainly, right? So now your uterus stops making that nice nesty lining, right? And basically life stops. If that lining isn't there for the egg to implant in, the embryo can't survive. It can't survive. And then the misoprostol softens the cervix and causes the uterine to contract, which starts the elimination of the lining. So it's a synthetic prostaglandin, which is a hormone, which it's almost like you're emulating labor to start, right? So, because the cervix is very hard and thick, and then it starts to what they call, like, so if this is your uterus and your baby's going to come out, the cervix is very hard and thick. It starts to thin and open, and dilation occurs for the baby's head to come out, right? Well, this softens the cervix in that similar way, get it to open, and just and then contract the uterus a little bit and just release that non-nesty lining that you have now softened up, right? And so that's what those pills do. You can order, let's say you can order misoprostol, or you can get it at the pharmacy, but you have to get a doctor's prescription for the mifepristone. So that's the one that was given to her in the doctor's office. I'm pretty sure that would be the one that was I think that was the one that would be given to her. Yeah, that would halt the progesterone. And then she could go to a pharmacy and get misoprostol. Sorry, it's misoprostol. It's the two words are so close. I get them like it's like a tongue twister, these things. So there are side effects. You can Google the side effects, but they're very similar to most pharmaceuticals. And because they go through your stomach, indigestion, nausea, cramping, diarrhea, back pain, headache. But basically, if you take these and get really sick or have completely unrelated symptoms, such as a drop in blood pressure, so faintness, cold sweats, or swelling in your legs, or hives, like an allergic reaction or something like that, you should be calling a doctor or going to urgent care or an emergency room. So it's a pharmacological, it's chemicals. So any of these things can get, I mean, the Queen Anne's lace, if you have flower allergies, you could get an allergic reaction to Queen Anne's lace. It's like, any herbal medicine can do that. But if you get like serious side effects, so these pills can do that. You should ovulate again after taking these about 2 to 3 weeks after using the abortion pills. It can be up to 6 weeks. So if you're concerned about getting pregnant again after taking these, it has to do with your ovulation, obviously. And unless you can tell when you're ovulating, the likelihood of getting pregnant is as high as any other time. If you have sex, remember the mantra, I had sex, so I could be pregnant. It's just like, that's just the reality. But usually when the bleeding is done, everything's done, it takes about 2 to 3 weeks again after using these pills and getting the process done to ovulate again.
Okay.
Similarly to having an abortion, or similarly to giving birth and not breastfeeding, you'll ovulate between 2 to 6 weeks after you're done.
Okay.
And that's basically what these pills do. There is a plant option that does exactly the same things. There's a plant medicine protocol. Now, when you said she bled for like 2 weeks, right, and fairly heavily, that's what happens. They don't really tell you that's what's going to happen when you take these pills. And so if you do the plant medicine protocol, the midwife you're with, or the herbalist you're with, or whoever you're with who knows what they're doing with this, will tell you this is going to take 2 to 3 weeks, and you're going to feel icky, and you shouldn't do it alone. I mean, you don't need someone with you 24/7. It's not dangerous, but you're making your body inhospitable for cell growth. So you're going to need some support and time. So you want to have people available to you, and you want to like not hesitate to call them. So you need your tribe, you need your community. What bothers me about what you said is that she went through this, but like no one told her that. She didn't have a midwife saying, we're going to do this thing now, and it's going to be a jolt to your body, and we're asking it to reverse everything it's doing. So get some movies lined up on Netflix, have some friends over, get some nice comforting tea going, or some hot chocolate if it's, it's like they didn't tell her that. But this plant protocol does the same thing, and your midwife or your herbalist would tell you that. So it kind of makes me sad that she didn't have that in her back pocket, that sense of that community, and that what she was doing, it's similar to giving birth. You have your midwife, you have your partner, you have maybe a friend or two, or your mother, someone who's there. Midwife just means with women, with woman, right? And that word didn't even occur until like the 16th century, I think. So I don't know what midwives were called before that, but the idea that you're having people with you when you go through women's stuff, you know. And
Well,
I'm just sad that you didn't have that.
they didn't tell her that, but she does have it organically, naturally. I'm
Good.
there. She's living with another friend of ours. Unknown. She it would have I see what you're saying about the midwife, because that energy through the process would have been a lot softer than what she got. So, but I suggested to her, because I was like, this is a potential of a being that is in your body. And so how about doing a ceremony to acknowledge that connection so that you can then release it consciously. And so she's been doing that, and actually she was going to do that tonight on her own. But yeah, so she does have support. I'm one of those people. I think experiencing it was interesting because she got pregnant before Thanksgiving and then went to visit her family in a different state. So this was all quite stressful on her. It was like a tsunami, like, you know, when everything happens at once.
Yeah.
So that put a lot of stress on her. Ooh. And then she came home and, well, I think she took the pill after she came home. But it's been kind of, well, not kind of, it's been very interesting to be a crone now, and then to be working with a friend who's so much younger, who's going through this, and she's a very old soul. And so I said to her, this feels like your initiation into womanhood, because she was, when you're an old soul like that, you get a little lost because you're not where your peers are at your age. So she was trying to be that, in my opinion, and she got lost in the story of that. And so now with this process, she's embracing more of her, I would say, her old soul nature, because she's here to do amazing work in this world and help a lot of people. And now she's going to have all this life experience because she is somebody who's gone through a lot already at such a young age. Oh my gosh. And, you know, that could be a whole other podcast or a whole other video, because, you know, being a woman in this life and what we deal with around sex and sexuality and men taking from us. She's been compromised twice in her life, where a man took sex from her and without her consent. And that's where it gets so confusing, you know? So it's not a black and white conversation. It's not just, oh, you know, yes, you're pregnant and this and that. It's very psychological and very, you know, there's a lot to it. But they just basically talk to her, you know, oh, you're pregnant, oh, you're this far along, these are your options, here's the pill, this is what could happen, come back in 2 weeks for a follow-up. Luckily, some of us are like, holy crap, you know, no, this is a big deal. Energetically, this is happening. And then it was just all ironic. Literally, to anybody who's watching this, all of this happened when Allison and I already decided to do this. And this other person was actually going to do it with us, being somebody who was of an age to get pregnant. I thought it would be valuable to have that voice on. And then she actually got pregnant. So I'm just, messaging with her now and talking to her, but it's understandable she wouldn't want to go public or anything. She's still going through it. She literally just had her 2-week checkup yesterday. So she's very much interested in listening to what we're doing right now. So I absolutely know, how they say, like, if just one person, if you reach just that one person, well, I know that what we're doing right now is actually reaching at least one person. Um,
Yes, good.
so
Well,
yeah,
and I haven't even touched those issues of the emotions and I mean, because to me, I will first of all, uh, I'm a I you and I might be extremely simpatico in many ways, but we are complete opposites in so many. I am like, first of all, everybody in my family is on the autism spectrum, and we're like the least emotional people on the planet. We're very clinical, and we're very like, just give me the facts, man, just the facts. We're not very coddling. We're not real good at that sort of thing, and it's not that we don't care or we don't love deeply or have very deep feelings, but we tend to go for like, oh, here's the solution, or here's the answers, or here we have this information, and um, at the same time so I'm like wanting to get information out there. It's like, people are freaking out. It's like, oh, I want you to have this information. I have this information. At the same time, having given birth, having been involved in the birthing community, because giving birth is like it's an elemental force. You are in the middle. You're not the middle of her. You are the hurricane. You're the eye, you're the storm, you're everything. And it's like, that's all. If you want to talk about identifying as anything, you just identify as a storm. It's a perfect storm, and it's powerful beyond belief. First of all, I love giving birth. It's so powerful and so immensely beautiful, and uh so something not to be afraid of. So such the perfect expression of nature, and it's like, it's it's I don't even call it emotional. It's like beyond that. So I have this deep um belief and respect for women's uteruses, women, reproduction, life giving, life taking, like we're so powerful at as 51% of this species. We are so powerful in that, so fortunate to be women, to biologically female, and it's like, it's such a powerful thing. And I tend to speak to the clinical, because when people freaked out about Roe, it's because they lost the clinical. They believe they lost all the clinical ability, the options. Well, here are your other clinical options. Just want you to know, they've been there for thousands of years, and so that's kind of my focus. But it is so important to recognize the power of life giving, life taking, and the role that menstruation, ovulation, conception, loss, whether early or later, miscarriage, whether very early or very late, birth, pregnancy release, abortion, all of those things, having to give up that you're in a car crash and who do you save? They didn't save the baby, whatever. It's like that whole, gain and loss in that arena. It needs to be honored on every level. It needs to be addressed on every level, not only the clinical, because we're physical beings. We have to know the clinical, the physical, the material way of dealing with all that, whether it's birth, conception, ovulation, pregnancy release, abortion, whatever. We have to know. Women need to know so that we can make choices. But those are the details. The rest is the life. That's the life we live as biological females, and the deep feelings and connections and surrender. because that's the thing. If you're the storm, you can do nothing but surrender to it. It's already going on, and there's nothing you can do but ride it, and I feel like from birth down to even ovulate, it's like we're still riding waves, and we need to be able to, I don't know, hold hands as we do it, connect. I don't know how to say it. It's like, I mean, it's the same thing about like midwife again. We need each other as we do that, whatever level that is. We teach young girls about menstruation. That doesn't come from the family doctor, the old guy doctor that we used to have when we were kids. It doesn't come from the mother or the aunt or the sister. Somebody teaches her, a woman teaches her who's been there. The midwife whispers in your ear when you're giving birth, you can do this because I've done this. It's okay. You're going to live through this, and if you're having an abortion, if you're doing pregnancy release, there needs to be someone, luckily she has you guys, but the doctors didn't tell her she was going to need somebody, because they don't recognize it in birth. Something that big, they're not going to recognize it in this. Take a pill, it'll be gone in a couple of weeks, you're good to go. It's like they don't recognize that. And I think part of this is that we do recognize that. We have to recognize not only the clinical, the physical, the options. We need that. We need the information, but we need to remember that women have not dealt with their biology in a vacuum all alone until only the last 50, 60 years. It has not been that way.
Yeah.
Ever on this planet.
Definitely a new thing. Yeah. 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 So what are our other plant options for pregnancy release besides the Queen Anne's lace?
Okay, so there's one main plant protocol and then other things that can help it along. So the plant protocol, the plant medicine protocol that mimics the 2 pills that she took.
Yeah.
Again, takes that commitment of time and energy, right? That couple of weeks that she took. It usually works. It doesn't always work. It's a good 90% effective in the early weeks. If it doesn't work, just like if she kept, like she went back after 2 weeks to get a checkup, right, to see how it was going. If she had continued bleeding, they would have done what they call a D&C, which is dilation and curettage, which is to go in and scrape out the remaining lining, which happens after there's a lot of reasons, a little endometriosis, a lot of different reasons why they do that procedure. They do it in the doctor's office. It's not a big deal, but it's just to scrape out any extra stuff that's there and make sure you're fine. Again, if this doesn't work, it's exactly like the 2 pills. You have to go see somebody. Like if you're still bleeding, so you have to remember that it's just like all pharmacological or non-pharmacological. You still have to be aware of what's going on and take responsibility for taking care of your health regardless. So we're looking for the same actions, some actions of the body. We're looking for a cervical softener. So when we look for which plants to use, we're looking for a cervical softener, a progesterone blocker, an oxytocin, which is what makes uterine contractions, and an emmenagogue, promotes menstrual bleeding. So she has those in those 2 pills. The 2 plants that do that the best are cotton root bark and black cohosh. So black cohosh is a plant that you'll often find even in, like, landscapers will come put it in your yard. It's a very popular plant to just have in your yard, apparently. But it's highly medicinal. You don't take it during pregnancy because it can start uterine contractions, and you don't take cotton root bark when you're pregnant either. Same with pennyroyal and some other things that they don't recommend that have also been used to help a pregnancy release, but these 2 are the most effective. So cotton root bark is and actually it's the cotton plant, and it's the root of the plant, and it's the bark of the root. So when we say cotton root bark, that's not one plant. It's cotton, grown in the South, picked by millions, cotton, uh, the bark of the root of that plant. So that's a progesterone blocker, an emmenagogue, and an oxytocin, which means it promotes contractions. Black cohosh is an emmenagogue, right, promotes menstruation, a progesterone blocker, and a cervical softener. So you have all the pieces together with those two. The protocol is to, it works best in the window of the gestational age of like 2 weeks to 4 weeks later. So up to 6 weeks after actual conception is the best time period, the time when it is, these two are the most effective, right? So up to 6 weeks, it's about 90% effective. But that's pretty much the same as the bisoprostol and the mifepristone. You can do it up to 2 months. So about 10 weeks, maybe 9 weeks gestation, but it works best the sooner you, so if you've missed your period and you take that, you pee on that stick and you're like, oh, heck in a handbasket, break out the black cohosh and the cotton root bark. It's time. Let's do this in the next week. You know, that's kind of what you're thinking. Or let's get those pharmacological pills. So here's how it works. Before you even, for a 6-hour period, you're going to prep your body. You're kind of giving it a booster jump. For 6 hours, you take 10 drops of the black cohosh tincture every 15 minutes. You also take 6 dropperfuls of cotton root bark tincture every 30 minutes. Now, there's a difference between 10 drops and 6 dropperfuls. So 10 drops of something is you've gotten the drops out on your spoon or in your mouth. Dropperfuls, if you take a 1-ounce bottle of a tincture and you squeeze it, basically it's about half full. A dropper full doesn't mean you have to fill the dropper completely, because it's impossible to suck up that much in it. And that's, a dropper full is about 25 to 30 drops. So people should know that right now. Don't, oh my gosh, I can't get a dropper full, you know. If you've squeezed it and it's gone about halfway up or so, that's a dropper full. So, and a dropper full is technically about 25 to 30 drops. So when it says dropper fulls, you're just squeezing it. Yep, that's about right. And you can, and I've done that. When I first was like, well, I took a spoon and I was like, I counted out how many drops, and it was between 25 and 30 from what I could suck up in in a 1-ounce bottle. So I sort of wanted to play with that and find out, was I getting the dosage if I wanted a dropper full? So 10 drops black cohosh tincture every 15 minutes, 6 dropperfuls cotton root bark tincture every 30 minutes for 6 hours. During this time, you're also doing other stimulating things that help. Orgasm, numero uno on getting that uterus moving. Have an orgasm or two during that time. Acupressure, hot showers, acupuncture, all of those things will help prep and get the uterus ready to eliminate what's in there. Then for the next 6 days, so you see this isn't a pill, for the next 6 days, during the day, you don't have to wake up in the middle of the night. You're going to take 20 drops of black cohosh every 6 hours and 10 drops of cotton root bark tincture every 2 to 3 hours. So a lot of women will do this before they go get the pharmacological pill. Sometimes they'll do this to make sure the pill works really well. But this alone has worked for hundreds and hundreds of women. I am aware of a midwife who does this in particular. I don't know the names of the others to do it, but I know one in particular. She's used this for dozens of years, and it has worked. She has reported, 90 to 95% effectiveness, like that it just takes care of things. So the science behind this is that black cohosh is used to induce labor. Even in medical journals, there's discussion relating its assistance in modulating estrogens and progesterones. They don't use it during pregnancy because of its labor-inducing qualities. Cotton root bark is listed in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology as an abortive fashion and a emmenagogue used in Spanish New Mexicans. In the New England Journal of Medicine, there's a reprint of an 1860 Boston Medical and Surgical Journal article where a woman it's actually an article about two labors in the same woman, but she actually tries to abort using cotton root bark, and she is successful. It's also listed in a 2011 peer-reviewed study of uterotonic plants and their actions in Planta Medica, which is a leading international journal on the field of natural products. I have those links and information in that resource, but you can Google it. You can find peer-reviewed studies that explain what constituents in those two plants have those actions and that it works. Other plants that will help while you're doing this, or when you're using the pharmacological pills, right? You can use a strong ginger tea. These are basically uterine, they help the uterus contract. Red raspberry leaf infusion, mugwort, catnip, motherwort, hops, passion fruit, lobelia, marijuana, angelica, dong quai, stinging nettle, evening primrose, ginseng, spikenard, schisandra are all used to promote uterine contraction. They are not enough on their own to do this, but they will support the process, whether you use the plant medicine protocol or the pharmaceutical. Parsley, before I get to that, you're going to feel icky. You're passing a potentially implanted embryo. So you are going to feel pretty icky during this process. And you should know that. Other things that people have used are parsley, but it's intravaginally. This was the method that I used for the plant-assisted abortion. It was super, super early, and I wanted to get my period, and I knew that I was just starting to. The only time I was ever late in my life, I was pregnant. I mean, like, the only times I was ever late in my life was when I was pregnant, and I knew it. So if I didn't get my period 2 days later, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm pregnant. So you take crushed part, you sort of like what do you call it? Bruise parsley a little bit in a mortar and pestle. You don't crush it completely, and then tie it up with some string. You're crushing it to get the aromatic terpenes, and you shove it up next to your cervix. Tie a piece of string to it. Oh, sorry, so you can pull it back out, and you shove it up next to your cervix. Replace it with a new one every 12 hours, and it basically softens the cervix. And there are constituents in it that encourage the lining, to encourages a period. Basically, it just encourages you to bleed. Now, that said, there have been reports of women who have used it, and then they end up bleeding way too much. Probably because they left it in too much. But it's, yeah. So you want to be sure that you know, I only stuck it up there once, and I got my period for a few hours. I think I took it back out, and then 2 days later I had my period. So I don't know. I probably didn't know I was supposed to keep changing them, and I just used it. And there you go. Bob's your uncle. I got my period because I just thought I would. So the mind is a powerful thing. Evening primrose oil can be used topically, applied to the cervix to soften it. So as you're doing the other protocols, whether pharmaceutical or not, you can use that. So basically, most women have said that doing this protocol in the 4 to 7 week gestation has worked the best. They have said that using the herbs by about 7 weeks, and using the misoprostol by about 8 weeks has worked the best. So after that, it doesn't seem to work quite as, either one doesn't seem to work quite as well. And that's because it's implanting. It's harder to get out. So that, and now the placenta is starting to form, and it's now secreting the progesterone. So it's harder to get that process to stop with medicines or you know, with pills, pharmacological or plant medicines. You know, and then you get into other physical means. Some people have used a heavy brown kelp that you dry. You cut it into strips, you dry it, they're pushed into the cervical os, and as they swell, they open the os, and you lose the contents of your uterus. It is not much recommended. It is used in parts of the world. It is not much recommended because it introduces far too much risk of infection and damaging the cervix. Some barks are used in the same way. Risk of infection is very high. Then there's the menstrual extraction and manual vacuum aspiration. So this started before Roe, in California. In the 50s and 60s, women have actually been passing on this information for decades, and it's still around. There are groups of women who have been doing menstrual extractions. They call it menstrual extraction. So it's super early on. They just empty, they go in and they get the contents of the uterus out. And I think at the time it wasn't electrified. They're literally sucking it out through a tube. So, and then dumping the tube. You don't actually get it in your mouth, but now it's more of a pump thing. There are groups who do this. So that's another option. And those are the more physical means, other than a clinical abortion, going and having someone actually do it in a clinical setting, or like I said, the back alley. So with the proper or improper equipment. So those are your, those are your methods, those are your choices. And there are quite a lot of them, and how they work and what you need. You can easily get black cohosh tincture. You can get that at Whole Foods or Sprouts. Right. Cotton root bark tincture, you can get it online pretty easily.
I'm just looking at it.
Or you can grow both of them, tincture your own, which is a tincture. Some people call tinctures like with glycerin, or those aren't tinctures, those are extract. A tincture uses alcohol. So if you're going to tincture your own stuff, make sure that you are using 80 to 100 proof alcohol. Because some people will go, oh, you can do a non-alcoholic tincture with glycerin. No, that's an extract. It's not the same thing. It's not the same solvent to get all of the stuff out. Glycerin will extract some constituents. Alcohol is 100 proof is half water, half alcohol. And the water soluble stuff comes out, and the alcohol soluble stuff comes out of the plant material. So, and a tincture always has to be fresh plant material. You cannot use dried, unless it's roots. I don't care what anybody says. You don't use dried. I'll just order some black cohosh dried and make my own tincture. This doesn't work. So better to just buy the tincture at Whole Foods then. You're not going to grow the plant yourself and tincture yourself.
Okay. All right. So is there anything else that we need to cover before we end this? Because this was a lot of information, and very good information.
It's a lot of information.
A lot of really good information, though. I feel
very
much more connected. I know, to my body, even though I'm not getting my period anymore. Yeah,
I think there's only one thing I would ask people to do. Honestly, if I were gonna just, like, as an old lady begging people who are freaking out or talking about Roe or abortion rights, I would really ask people to stop talking about it in a lot of the ways that they do. I think number one, we need to stop saying Republicans and conservatives are the problem, or pro-lifers. Basically, they pointed out a problem that Democrat and Republican politicians knew about with this fetal tissue sales going on. And instead of reminding these people to follow the federal or state restrictions on gestation and abortion, and reminding that they overturned it. But they're not the problem, these people, right? And to go, oh, Republicans, and they want to get rid of it for a long time. Yeah, they have, but they haven't been able to. For 49 years, they couldn't get rid of Roe. So stop saying it's conservatives and Republicans are the problem here. It's Big Pharma and the people who sold to Big Pharma. They opened the door. For 49 years, Republicans have been, and pro-lifers, and not even all Republicans, but because a lot of Republican people I know are pro-choice. But our speech just becomes divisive, but it's also ignorant, because Republicans and conservatives are not the problem concerning the overturning of Roe. It was profits and greed. I also think that the people need to stop saying Roe made abortion legal, and that overturning it made it illegal, because it didn't. I really think people need to learn to not say that as a gut reaction. People need to stop asking for rights. You have to give me my rights. Well, rights aren't given. You have rights. They are recognized or not recognized, but it's an issue of language. When we're talking to people about why we should have abortion available, people have to stop using arguments of rape and incest and poverty as a reason to keep abortion illegal. The reason is because the majority of abortion, the vast majority of abortions are done for convenience and contraception. I don't want a baby now. I'm not ready for a baby now. I don't want to be pregnant. That's fine. But that has nothing to do with rape, incest, and poverty. What about all those poor people? What if your 10-year-old was raped? That's not an argument, and it's not going to move these people because it's funny that we pro-choice don't know the statistics and pro-lifers do. Well, the statistics are that the vast majority of abortions are for contraception, convenience. I just don't want a baby. They know that. Why don't we? So our language and our level of understanding of this issue really have to change, right? And I think basically we have to stop calling abortion healthcare, because it is not. Unless it is an issue of wellness, it is not an issue of healthcare. We don't have a right to abortion. We truly, legally, physically, we do not. It's elective surgery. What we do have a right to, and this is where I think we could get this legalized on a federal level forever. If we opened the conversation that anything to do with breaking and entering in the body in any way or pharmacologically is between a patient and a doctor, we'll just call it patient and doctor, healthcare worker and client. There are methods of medical care that are banned in this country or restricted that shouldn't be, like certain cancer treatments, for instance, that we can't get here, that we have to go to other countries to get. We don't have the right in this country to seek out medical care that our doctors may want to give us because big pharma and government and whatever has limited it. And I think if there were some kind of movement towards recognizing the right of people to get treatment, medical treatment, for whatever they and their doctor agree on, as long as it's not harmful, like they give me a cancer treatment that would kill me anyway, for sure. It's like, or I would spread some disease from it, what they give me, that kind of thing. Then there needs to be some kind of recognition of the right to treatment.
Yes.
That's different from saying I have a right to health care, because Republicans don't want to pay for your health care, nor should they have to. But they're not going to argue with you if all you said was, but I have the right to treatment. Of course you do. Nobody argues with that. You know what I mean? Like no Republican, conservative, or pro-lifer would say you don't have a right to go get that treatment that your doctor agrees you need. Now, you don't have to tell them what it was. Abortion falls under that, but so does cancer. So does diabetes. There are a lot of treatments that we don't get in this country that other countries use that are safe, that are effective, that are more natural, or at least if they're not natural, they're definitely more effective. But they don't make a lot of money for big pharma here, which is why we don't use them. So I think if there was some kind of recognition of the freedom to choose your treatment recognized under the Constitution as an inalienable right, I believe that's where we could go in the future with securing the right to abortion as a treatment. So it's a legalese thing. It's tricky in language, but it's not a right to abortion, but certainly the right to go to your medical professional and get whatever treatment you both agree to. And if an abortion is a treatment for your condition, then there it is. That's fine. Then it's now protected. But I don't think we can run around blaming people for Roe being overturned, other than the greedy bastards who, caused the problem in the first place, and our government who won't go up against them. It's not Republicans. It's not conservatives necessarily. It's not a right. Roe didn't make it legal, and overturning Roe didn't take it away. So I just think we need to start thinking about it differently, wisely, legally, and use all of our options and share these options, grow the plants, share the options as best we can and widely, women need to take this back. We have been taking back so much stuff over the last 100 years. We haven't taken this back, and we have to do that.
Yeah, and one of the things that we used to live in a matriarchal society, and the women used to oversee all of the, I'm going to just use the word legal stuff. And then that became a thing of the past. And now we're here. But I remember during the COVID situation, and people were not allowed to use protocols that we've been using in this country for 75 years, proven safe, but because they were so cheap, they did not allow doctors to utilize this in the hospitals. And if people did not see that as an issue, then, I mean, what more do they need? I mean, when the writing is on the wall and these news outlets are not news, it's not non-biased information.
Right.
It's completely op-ed. It's opinion-based. It's directed with an agenda. And if people cannot see that and take responsibility for themselves and their own health and well-being, then, I mean, there is a level of, for me, personal responsibility is such a huge factor in my life. Like, I don't like blaming other people for my stuff. I want to be autonomous, in charge. I make the choices. Nobody's putting a gun to my head to make a choice. That would be a karmic thing, actually. Like, there's a lot that I have choice over, but if somebody comes and overpowers me, then we're in a different energetic situation. And that I understand. In a way, I would be like, okay, here it is. You're making your choice right now. It's a choice I don't want, but you're overpowering me, and okay. So it's like this now. But yeah, so in the healthcare and with the food that we put in our bodies, I mean, just because you go to the store and it's convenient to buy processed and packaged foods does not mean that it is the food that you should be buying. I'm literally making.
Doesn't even mean that it's food.
It is not food. It is disgusting. Like, all that vegetarian fake food that they're shoving down people's, like the Impossible burgers and all of that. I mean, I love the way they taste, but I don't eat that stuff. I don't eat it on a regular basis because it's not actually food. And then it's disrupting my system. So it's I'll eat it once in a while. But yeah, people need to really think and ask questions and dig deeper and really take responsibility for their bodies and their health and well-being, and of their children. If you've got children, I mean, oh, it drives me nuts.
I want to speak to something you just said about when someone forces you, and that's another karmic reality completely, right? And that reminded me that, so there was this really famous case of witch burning in 1591. The woman was Euphemia McLean. She was burned in Scotland on Castle Hill. She was burned as a witch. Her crime was that she had asked for some pain relief during her labor a few months before. And one of the women, a servant or a niece or somebody, had overheard her asking the midwife for pain relief and had reported her, because at the time the church was saying that the pain in childbirth is part of your penance for original sin, whatever. I don't know. It's like, it's a big deal. But anyway, that was their thing. At the time, the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches, or the Protestant factions, they weren't really Protestant yet, were vying for followers. And the whole witch hunt thing was a control issue and that's what I mean by like that forcing thing was an issue that became very big between about 1450 to 1750. And that was like the karmic forcing of women and their ways to become completely underground and completely hidden.
Yep.
Because before that, women shared that knowledge and did all that stuff. And, they took care of all these things. And even in a patriarchal society, women still did that stuff. Women still, and the thing is, all of the modern, at the time, modern medicine was done by what they called barber surgeons, because they had the sharpest objects available to them, barbers, and they became what was known as barber surgeons. And modern medicine wasn't based on science. We didn't have science yet. We didn't have modern science. So healers, all these women who used herbs and plants, had no evidence as to why plant medicine could work, right? Or support wellness or nourish cells, which, whatever, in any way. And they, even though they had done so for millennia. So the only answer for authorities was that must be the devil's work. Must be something evil. You must be consorting with demons. And a woman asks for some kind of relief during her labor, and she's burned a few months later. This was a very famous case. And to me, this is exactly what you're talking about. This is that forcing down that you can't control, you can't do anything about it. But this is what, 430 years ago now, is that right? 410, yeah, 430 years ago. And now we are in time to change our sharing of knowledge and our connection to this knowledge that women have had, and they've kept it underground, but it's still there. And if nothing else, peer-reviewed studies has taken, traditional medicine and studied them and come up with reasons for why they work. Well, it has this constituent, and it has that constituent, or it has that enzyme, and it has that. All of our medicines came from plants originally. All the synthetic medicines are simply synthesized chemicals that were the chemicals in plants that worked. So it's such a good time now to get what did so long ago and share this stuff again and get over it. Bring it all back.
Oh yeah. Bring it back. That's what we're doing. We're bringing it back, Allison. We're cycling back around again.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's there. The information's there. And supporting each other needs to be there.
I mean, and the bigger picture now, our internet issue is happening again at 4:44. That's my time. Oh my gosh. Is, the bigger picture is that what is this life really? If we literally go inward, the answers are all within us. And, sometimes just being quiet, like building up your physical strength and strengthens your field, and it allows you to be stronger in spirit, so that all the data, I've been talking about this lately because now there's so much data going in the waves. You have to be so strong to live your truth, your dharma, your unique way, and you have to be strong enough to do that. And because otherwise you're going to be bombarded, and that's going to cause you to be insecure about your choices and all the things, because you're going to naturally want to fit in to what the main scenario is. And I think, as you and I both know, because we've never been ones to fit in the mold, that it's possible to hold your heart and your personal power and to live an amazing life, and yet not give away your it's not just your power, but give away give consent when you didn't understand what was actually going on. Like, people don't really understand what's going on energetically, so they're just constantly saying or agreeing to things they don't understand what the energetic what's the word? The energetic relationship is the give and response, because that's the cycle. So it's okay to give an empowered no, just like it's okay to give an empowered yes, but to give yeses and nos not based on you, to me, is what is sad to me, because it's a life that isn't really lived, like really truly lived, where you're freaking out and you don't know how it's going to work out, but you're just like, I am a being of light in infinite light in the universe, and I call in, the bigger picture is that I have all the rights because I was simply born, and that language is man-made, and it has been manipulated over the years, centuries, and each word has a frequency and a vibration, and those frequencies and vibrations are part of how we are creating our reality. Sound, frequency, all those things. That's what makes everything vibrate at what it does to become visible, or however you put it, to the senses, right? That's why in Buddhism, they're always like, oh, don't let those senses fool you, right? We get trained in that, like what you see is not actually what's real, what you taste is not actually what's real. And it's like you deep dive into what that looks like. And women, back to the woman thing, are very naturally able to tune into the unseen forces of the world. And it's that threat on that masculine energy, that unenlightened masculine energy, that's so threatened by that, I think. And that's natural. But it's like you cannot mess with
biologically, they had a different role than we did.
It's a different role.
Biologically, men had different roles in life.
Literally.
And so they're different focuses, and women had different roles, and yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't that women weren't warriors or men weren't homekeeper. It's not about that. It's not about the jobs. By roles, I don't mean the jobs that they did. I mean, their cultures, their partnerships, regardless of the jobs the males or the females had, they were partnered up equally, like they were clear. I'm clear about my role, you're clear about your role, it works. I hold these sacred truths, you hold these sacred truths, and we come together, and and now we're a family. Now we're a whole, and we're a family, and then we have extended family, we have children, and we have parents and grandparents and other clans members and whatever, and tribesmen and whatever, and it became this, it's like this gorgeous mandala, of humanity. But and again, it had nothing, and by roles, I don't mean the jobs, it was, but each one has their sacred place. It's when that sanctity is lost, we have no inner life. Our culture has no inner life.
Yeah,
it's all about what's going on outside of us, and we're constantly asking to be entertained or informed, but like you say, who were informed from the human being, to the human sponge of lies. I don't know, it's just really, really weird. It's
very weird.
Just starting to break up here, and I should tell you that starting to break.
You've been breaking up for a while, so we're gonna call it to an end, and we'll come back at another time and talk more about the masculine and feminine and how that works. because that's a
Well,
conversation.
Surge will have to be part of that.
Oh,
He's my
definitely.
masculine.
Yes. Love it. Thank you so much, Allison, for coming and sharing this amazing knowledge and wisdom with us. And we'll see you on another video when we can talk about things like the masculine and the feminine. And yes, so I hope you'll do that.
So much for doing this because it's so important. And it just, if we can replace fear with love and possibility, then we've done our job. Really. Thank you.
Amen. Hallelujah.
For all that you do.
So it is.